Totally.
Hello, this is Michael Tabb. We are in April, or we're about to be in April of 2018, week one of the classes Character Creation and Development, as well as Writing for Film and Animation, which basically means screenwriting, which is single story development. I am here today with the student who has shown up. Thank you, Mr. Aldridge.
You're very welcome. Glad to be here.
Glad you're here. What I like to do during these things is whatever students are able to show up, I'm here to always answer any question you have because sometimes people don't email. Sometimes people like to hear the answers and they learn better from hearing and discussing. So I like to make this opportunity available to everybody once a week, as well as obviously being able to email me or whatever anytime. So I just wanted to ask real quickly, Mr. Aldridge, did you have any questions coming into this little session before we talk about our work?
I did on the genre and premise
Premise is the
section of
hardest
the
thing
assignment
to
today.
learn. I honestly believe the premise, which is where we're starting from, is probably the hardest thing we learn in the whole program. So
Oh,
it's,
okay.
it's totally natural for that to be a difficult mind jump to leap, to navigate. So go ahead and
Okay.
ask.
Okay. On the assignment itself, you had asked for visuals, like 40 visuals per genre,
Yes.
and going through that, I personally, I think I overkilled it. I think I did a little either more than what I was supposed to do, as far as getting a little too specific, too deep. I actually, in my mind, came up with screenshots that I saw. For example, I wanted to focus on music, and I I basically wrote out, close up of. I saw a person, a character, and I put the character's hands on the piano, a close up of that. Character throwing guitar out the window, or I got very specific, and I
And
don't
what
know if that's what
genre
I was
were
supposed
you
to do.
writing musical? Was your genre music?
I'm actually not writing a musical. I have several different things. One is a drama, and I haven't written the story yet, obviously.
Good.
But I came up with three different genres. I came up with three different genres, and all three involve music. I'm a professional musician by trade, and so that's what I'm passionate about writing. So all three are very different, but they all involve music, and so obviously the focus is they show my characters with musical instruments. But specifically, what I'm saying is I made my visuals extremely specific and visual, of things I saw my characters doing within a story, such as singing in a choir, such as um, I, I thought of even conflict ideas of, one of the stories involves an autistic child who's a gifted prodigy, who his parents, I saw them screaming. I saw this child touching a piano for the first time. I saw this child getting on the drums for the first time, and I saw this child in front of a huge stage. So I wrote the specific visuals of those out, and I don't know if that's what you were looking for or not. I think that might be, after researching your notes and researching what my classmates did, I feel like I might have overkilled it, overshot.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you wouldn't be worried about story yet or what the characters are doing or even what disabilities they may have. That's not where we are yet. So you can let all the stress of that go.
Right.
Um, when somebody's doing an action, it needs to not be, it needs to have everything to do with the genre and not to do with a character and what they may do professionally. We don't, right now we're not dealing with what their professions are. You may have musicians in all your movies that you write, but that doesn't mean that when you're writing a brainstorm, you mentioned you're doing drama. The brainstorm
Right.
should include visuals that would include something like a drug driving car accident,
Okay.
being rushed to the hospital, going to a funeral, um, um, an argument with somebody in your family, maybe more specific like that,
Okay.
a fight with a friend, um, a physical fight. These are things that reek of drama. A
Right.
courtroom appearance, being sentenced to serve time. Um, though that last one could actually also be a crime story, which is a different genre. You want the genre, all the genre images have
I see.
nothing to do with anything outside the genre itself. We are not at the story level. We are at, here's what I want to say, and here is the world in which I wish to say it. And that is it. There are no actual
Right.
physical
I-
pictures. It is all written
Oh,
lists of things that happen. If you write a Western, you're going to have spurs jangling on the dust
right.
blown street by a tumbleweed. You're going to
I
write,
love those descriptions
yeah.
that you wrote there.
So somebody fiddling with a guitar, unless it's a musical, which would have to do with playing music, then it would be okay. But unless it's a musical, it's not genre specific, and you would be incorrect to put it on your list.
Okay, gotcha. And then what about I did three different genres. That one was drama, and the other was a historical biopic of like a professional musician of the 1920s or something. Now,
Bio,
what about that one? Would that also I wouldn't be able to put musical?
well, you might call it, you might say it's a biopic musical. You're allowed to pick two genres, but you'll do a separate list for musical with the musical elements in it, tap
Okay,
dancing, and you may remember you may not use every image you put on the list. It's just to get your brain hardwired into what the visuals would be of the story you're thinking of telling. It's to get your head excited and wrapped around the kinds of images that you will need to incorporate into your story in order to make it
right.
fit the genre perfectly, so that a studio would be able to sell it because they know what it is when they saw it. So
Okay,
musical stuff you would put in musical, the biography, would be true story imagery. Um, what if you have a specific person in mind? For me, when you want to write a biography, you talk about somebody's first love, the woman that
right.
changed the way he sees things, or the man that did it. You would talk about how this person first became famous to the public eye, uh,
Right.
when his own fans turned against him or her. Uh, Things that would work for any and all public figures, where
Right.
they got their big break and how. Um,
Okay.
uh, who was the idol that they looked up to be? Who was the idol that disappointed them the most? Who in their career was their biggest competition? Um, and you'd want to look at the history of biographies, and what you'd look at because we wouldn't necessarily know who we'd be writing about yet. You'd think about, where did this person grow up and how did that affect how they behave and how they think? How were they
Right.
raised? What kind of relationship did this person historically have with their parents? Were they raised as a foster child? Were they raised by devoted, loving parents who financed their every move? Um, all these things would have a huge impact on how somebody would feel or would not feel, or how aggressively they would be going after what they want, and what would make them aggressive about it. One would become famous because he had to fight tooth and nail for every little success he had because he had nothing.
Right.
Another might have had a silver spoon, and all he had to do is throw money at problems, which is why he became the leader he did. Um,
Right.
and either way, somebody could have been raised in a house of, if you're talking about the story of a musician, was he raised by musicians? Was there somebody in the family that was a musician that first gave him that influence that made him, like, was an uncle a famous guitar player, or even not a famous guitar player, but he played in a mariachi
Right.
band.
There you go. Bond.
James Bond. Now we're doing a spy musical.
There you go.
I'm Sean Connery, and I play.
That
No.
was pretty good.
Thanks. Uh, so you remember, if you pick more than one genre, you have to do more than one genre brainstorm list. And just
Right.
because you list one genre more than once, you guys, if you do more than one, I'm talking to everybody in general. If you pick three different, you have to use three different premise to start with, and then you have to have at least one genre per premise. So, and then so you have 40 images per. So that means 120 images. But if on one of your premise you have two genres, that adds another 40 images. So you go from 120 to 160. And if you do two genres on each and really get your practice thinking about imagery, you're looking at up to 240 images for the genre. And just because you pick drama twice doesn't mean you only have to do 40. That means you have to do 80. So,
Oh
um,
wow, I didn't know that. That's good to know.
good to know. Good to know. This is why we
This
do
is all
these.
great, excellent feedback.
Yes. Do you have any other questions about it? Did you want to talk about? Did you have any questions about premise or anything?
I actually have a couple more genre questions.
Yeah.
Another would be okay, we book of musicals. For my research, musicals all involve kind of like a song and dance, but can it involve just instrumentals? Can it involve just music without the song and dance, like
I see the
constant
Doors.
performances?
I see the Doors as a musical. I mean, they're always playing
Okay,
music that I see, they do concert films, and I would see those as musical oriented. I don't think, look, you would want to ask yourself if there are ways like La La Land that you could integrate
right,
things like that.
right,
And I think that we love, most people love music. I love music. And to add music and put some movement to it, it just seems like the most natural thing in the world. And you don't have to have a bunch of dance numbers. I mean, look at Jesus Christ Superstar was a lot of talking and a lot of
right,
railing and wailing, and there are rock musicals, like Tommy. Tommy's a musical, but it's more about the psychedelic aspect of the time, and it's about a kid who's blind, deaf, and they say dumb, not me.
okay,
Pinball Wizard and stuff like that, and it's more about the visuals and things like uh, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. They made a movie. It was about getting instruments, and though there was a little dancing, it was more about the atmosphere and creating an esoteric reality. So no, musicals doesn't have to be song and dance, top hat and tails kind of thing. Though you might have that image somewhere in your movie just to play with it a little bit. And you might think about incorporating it, but not in a major way, just so that
right,
I mean, not only is it fun to do that, but it might serve the story to have a character who does that, who's very much that way, you know,
right,
you know, the, and old timer musicians, something like that.
right. All right. Sounds good. Appreciate it. My last question is my last genre category was supernatural, and which is a difficult one. Which again, I wanted to incorporate music, so it's like I have angels and demons fighting
Love it.
and things like that. But I also see musical instruments involved, and I didn't know how like if like for example the drama, if I have to take out the
Crossroads.
musical. Say what?
You ever see the 1980s film Crossroads?
I have heard of it, but I have not.
It's like that song. Devil went down to Georgia. He was looking for a soul to
Right.
steal. He was in a bar, then he was way behind, then he was willing to make a deal. He came up on this fiddle player. He was whatever. So it was by the Charlie Daniels Band. And there's another one. They do songs about the battle with the devil, like Spanish Train by Chris de Burgh. I don't know if you've ever heard that one. That one's a really good one. You
No,
should look
no.
it up online.
Okay.
And yeah, you can have a supernatural musical.
Okay. And like so as far as so then it would be called supernatural musical for my genre. It'd be the two genres together,
Yeah,
or for my
if,
okay, okay,
if you're doing musical and it's going to be about playing music, like playing against the demons and the devils, or maybe they play, maybe the way that they fight is through music.
right.
I don't know. It's the ultimate, like,
That's kind of the I was thinking.
yeah. I wrote a comic book that did that.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah, for
cool. That's
Stan
awesome.
Lee. Yeah, it was. They were doing a comic book that he had made a deal with. Dating myself, the Backstreet Boys, and I wrote second issue of the Backstreet Boys comic for Stan Lee. where the Backstreet Boys had the. Um, I was inspired by, believe it or not, I don't know if you know this, there was a TV movie special when Kiss was at their highlight, the hard rock band, and they did a TV movie. And
Oh no, I didn't know
and
that.
they had to battle. They also had to battle robot musicians who were built to replace them.
Wow.
So look at Scott Pilgrim versus the Universe. That is a fantasy. That's a fantasy musical, and they're always playing against each other in that.
Right.
That one's that's actually a very underrated film, I think, because it's all about video games and music. It's very youth
Oh,
oriented.
right. All right. Well, great. Great. That answers my questions. Thank you. I appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. It's what I do. Okay, so the questions have been answered, and we've talked about a lot about what went into the genre selection. Don't forget that when you come up with a premise, that the premise has to fit all the criteria that is mentioned in the premise video. Rewatch it and make sure that after you've come up with your premise, like I like to try to come up with as many as I can, and then you'll find yourself when you look at all the things it can't be, you'll have to cross some of them out. Like, you don't put metaphors in a premise. You don't put negative words in a premise like not, because you want to say what something is, not what it's not. You're trying to pigeonhole something, a reality. You're not telling us what it's not. We know what it's not. We need to know what it is. What is the answer? We're looking for answers in this universe. And you, as a writer, your job is to come up with them. Our job is to better humanity, or at least get people to be more truthful about what humanity is. So, and the only way to do that is to lock down what things are and disregard what they're not, because what they're not isn't what we need to prove. Um, so there's a whole list of things in there. So make sure that they apply, that the ones you come up with apply to that list of qualifications. And so you got to do three of those, and then at least one genre and a brainstorm list. If you're using musical in three different genres, then you got to come up with 120 musical brainstorm lists yourself. 40 for
Right.
each time you use it, and they need to be different. Um,
Okay.
but they look, this first time I'm not going to get tough with you about it. I like it when you come up with a whole like longer sentence that kind of gives you a real sense of what it is. But I'm okay with the fact if keyboards, drums, bass, and then I'll make a comment at the bottom of yours. Okay, now it's time to put some imagery along with that bass, because we're not just talking about nouns. We're talking about things people see and do. That's what excites people in the movie, is action, is what people are trying to accomplish. And that's how we
Right.
really get into things. We do have somebody else who's joined our meeting. Ms. Henrik, I want to open the floor up for you if you had any questions today about the homework at all yet. Perhaps you need to figure out what's truly going on. Oh, so we have a little angel with us, which is perfectly all right. That's great. Love to your little angel. You may not be able to talk at the moment. I understand. All right. So, just so you know, you'll be able to watch this later. I'm going to try to upload it later so that everybody can have a chance to learn from this. Okay. Second thing is I want to talk about. I'm talking about the assignments now. So you have a premise and you have 40 written out images that pertain specifically and only to the genre itself. It doesn't have to do anything with the story. We do not have a story yet. We do not have a character. We are going to use these images to kind of give us ideas on what kind of characters to use in the genre that will help us serve the premise that we're trying to prove. Now, that's it. That's this week. But premise, again, I'll say it. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Premise is the hardest thing. And just remember, after you have your premise ideas, run them through the video on premise from the premise lesson and make sure it doesn't break any of those rules. You may find yourself having to take what you thought was a good metaphor and switch it to something. What does that mean literally? Because we want our premise to be literal and clear to understand. Because only when you figure out what you literally mean can you really design a character to serve it properly? Because that's important. Also, we don't want cliches or anything that we already know to be a fact, because then we're not adding anything to the pantheon of storytelling or knowledge. If you don't have something unique to say and you haven't figured out what it is you want to say to the world, believe it or not, a lot of people have a hard time in this world. We all know this. And they think that their opinions are not valid and they are not being given support either at home or in the world to make them feel like what it is they think or have to say, they don't have the support for that. Well, in this classroom, you have your support. We're going to try to help you make it better, clearer, more precise, and actionable. Uh, your ideas and thoughts and the things that you think are worthy of discussion. Now, we may come up with reasons why it doesn't work because either A, it's cliche and everybody knows it, nobody would argue against it. But what we're trying to do is prove points that people don't realize are a reality. Um, and either that can be to benefit mankind or to simply make sure mankind is more knowledgeable about what it is going on in this world and what we're dealing with in reality. We're shining a light on it. And that's what we do as writers. We shine a light on truth. Uh,
Right.
that's the core behind. And if that's important, which we know it is, then that puts a lot of pressure on us to come up with a really good premise. And that's why it's so important. That's why I dedicate so much time in this class in this first week to figuring out, is soul searching involved, what it is we want to say, what it is about me as a writer that and what I have to say about the world based on my life, my points of view, my experience, that would separate me from all other writers, so that when I'm writing something, even if it's in a genre people have seen 150 million times, then it's still going to be something worth watching, because what I'm saying with it is special, unique, new, and something nobody else does, because it's my opinion and I haven't seen it before done this way. And
Right.
that's why this week is so important. It's not a And from these opinions and from the point you want to make, we are going to grow characters that are going to protest what we have to say, and then going to fight for it, and then support in different ways and show it. That brings me to writing for film and an animation class. Now they have gone through this class already of character creation and development. So this week, what they turned into me is a final version of what they developed in CCD or CCR, whatever they're calling it now, character creation. Uh, they're doing an advanced version of this. So they have a premise, they have a genre, they have a brainstorm list, and the brainstorm list of the genre they've selected now has 120 images minimum per genre they selected to be a part of that. And then they've designed the characters now. So they will have a protagonist's inner journey and outer journey. They will have a love interest, a mentor, a protagonist's reflection character, and even a log line for the story. So, and then that's what we're growing into, a full fledged concept for a film. And then we'll write a short film version of it that is by the end of the class, and rewrite it once with editing notes. Does anybody have any questions regarding any of the homework assignments or any of the lessons so far? That we've got another student who's joined us, which is wonderful. If anybody has any questions, you can type it in the chat window. Now, unfortunately, in the audience or the people who are watching this later on a recording, you can neither see the video that is projecting my face on the webcam, nor can you see the chat window. But if somebody asks a question in the chat window, I'll read it out loud. Does anybody have any other questions at all about this assignment, or about anything in general? Want to talk about anything? Now's your chance. I will do this once a week to make sure everybody has an opportunity to get involved and learn more. We have a question here. Are the visuals just what comes to mind? No. Um, I know you mentioned them not being specific to a story. Correct. They are specific to the genre only. You may not even use a lot of the images you come up with. For example, in a crime, in a crime story, you'd have somebody planning out a murder, someone planning a bank heist. someone robbing somebody in an alley, somebody strangling somebody with their bare hands. Uh, you got to wrap your head around crime. You'd have organized crime families arguing at a table, and one of them brings out puts his gun on the table. You know, paint images that say to you, "This is the genre. This is where I'm placing it. This is the world in which I am going to state what it is I want to state about the world, whether whatever that premise is." So it's very, very specific, and it has to only. You should not have an image in your list that you wouldn't say, "Oh, that's definitely this genre." You know, crime history. You could talk about, if you want to do a historical film, you talk about sword fighting in an age before guns. You talk about castles and defense barriers, wars between nations, including armies and catapults. You could talk about toting machine guns across enemy lines in the Civil War. They had to use the Mississippi where they could to try to get food to people because everybody was so removed from everything, and they didn't have planes to just airlift and drop food and supplies off to soldiers that needed it. They had to find a way to get it to them, and if they didn't have a train line or a boat to get it to them, it was just as hard to get it to them across land and risk not seeing any of the other soldiers and sending out scouts and what that would mean, and what are the most dangerous jobs that a person has in wartime. Being a scout in the Civil War was one of them. I mean, you weren't just worried about running across people from the other army who were on the lookout, but you had to worry about the natives because they had grown restless and they were really sick and tired of all these people coming into a place where they had had their lives for generations and generations. They came from across an ocean and started walking right into their homes and disregarding and disrespecting what they had and where they lived. And they're desecrating their burial plots, not understanding that there was great cultural significance to that. So, what are the things we fight for? You figure out, assassinations. That could be crime, but that could also be war. War movies, it could also be historical. Some things would cross over, but you'd want to think about which one does it fit best. You know, like war movies, or you'd have minefields. You know, attack plans and rendezvous and catching people in a crossfire and friendly fire. Those are war film terms. They all the images that's why it's a piece of cake to come up with 40. I don't want to see like bedroom, desk, office. It's like, what genre is that? Now, if you have somebody being thrown across a desk and what you have is an action film, then it makes sense. But it has to fit the genre. It cannot just be random words. Where random words help nobody and they give you no focus and they won't show you how to show what you want to do and what you're trying to show for your audience. Um, do you have any other questions? That was a good one. Give them a second to type, or you can speak out loud. It's perfectly all right. I do not mute anybody in my conversations. You're very welcome. She just typed, thank you. You can't see the chat window, but I do. All right. If we don't have any more questions, I have discussed what the different things, the different assignments we have today. I'll go over a little bit of the characters that we'll be building toward, and sometimes this helps with understanding premise. Um, After you have a premise, your premise obviously is literally a true thing. It's not a metaphor or anything. I've said it before. I'll say it. I'll wind up saying it again a million times. So, a lot of times, something that you're proving in the premise winds up being actually part of the character's inner journey. Because in week 2 of character creation and development, you'll develop a protagonist and antagonist that are designed to fight for and against what it is you're going to have the protagonist trying to accomplish. So you have The protagonist's inner journey is going to be how they're going to change so that they realize your premise. So, do any of you out there have a premise you're working on for the class that you want to share that you're really excited about?
I would have to pull mine back up.
Okay, okay. Well, um, let's say you know, uh, trust, uh, trust will eventually break. No matter how much you think you have it, I would get rid of no matter how much. Trust always falls through. If that's something you believe that you truly can't trust anybody, and that's how you view the world, then what your protagonist character arc would be in the beginning, they'd be very trusting, and then at the end, they would be leery. They're untrusting, right? We wouldn't use un or less or any of those suffixes or prefixes that kind of say not this. We want to use an actual word that means what it is we're saying. So the premise gives you usually one of the words that is the key to your inner journey for your protagonist. The protagonist character is the character who goes through who's usually the central character, but not always, but usually, and is changed by the experience of going through the story it is you're going to tell. They're the ones most changed by it, and they are the most principal role of all the characters that go through a major change. Um, Hold on 1 second, please. I'm sorry. Sorry, there was a lot of background noise where I am, and I wanted to try to put it to an end. Um, So your protagonist has to go through all of that. Your protagonist has to go through a major change, and that's what you have to decide and figure out how to do, because that's how you prove a point. If you're going to prove a premise, it's through a character realizing that it's true, and with that protagonist becoming knowledgeable about that fact and realizing that for themselves, the audience is along with them for that journey and learns it with them. That's how you prove your premise, is through a protagonist that learns it. So whatever you're trying to prove at the beginning of the movie, the protagonist does not understand it, and as a matter of fact, works in the opposite way that you think the world should work. And then they realize, or the way it does work. And then throughout the movie, they have to realize, oh my gosh, I have to change because this is how the real world is, or this is how I need to be in this world if I want to make the world a better place. So, so the protagonist's inner journey is going to be the personification and proof that your premise is real and that it's true and this is why. And then you have to, if somebody is going to be proving that this is happening, you have to have people working against your protagonist in that journey to make it hard for them. And that's an antagonist. So the protagonist has an inner journey and an outer journey. So the inner journey is how they're going to change on the inside, how their perspective changes. That they do. The protagonist does not know that that's their inner journey. They don't know they're going on an inner journey. Nobody realizes they're going to change before they change. So this is not planned. The inner journey is the result of going through an outer journey of trying to accomplish something. So the protagonist has something in the physical world they're trying to accomplish, an actual physical task. And all the people in character creation are going to be doing this next week. And so when you realize what the inner journey is, you've got to look. You'll look at the genre and you'll look at what you want them to be doing in the inner journey, and you'll try to find something that fits both of those things to give them an outer journey task they want to accomplish. Whether it's to get off the streets and stop being homeless and buy their own home, whether it's to marry the person that they love, whether it's whatever they learn at the end of the beginning of your story. A story is in 3 acts: beginning, middle, and end. And the beginning, it happens in the first quarter of the story. And by the end of the first quarter of your story, your protagonist realizes what it is they need to do. And that's the outer journey. So that's the thing they're going to spend all of Act Two, which is the middle half of your movie, trying to accomplish. And then in Act Three, they will have a final confrontation with the antagonist, winner takes all kind of situation where they will either achieve that outer journey goal or not. Believe it or not, attaining the outer journey goal, which is what most people will know about the movie when they go to see it from the previews, that's not half as important for the writer as is achieving the inner journey of the goal. People go there to see what they think is an outer journey, but what we supply is the heart and soul of an inner journey, and that's what makes a film truly rewarding. So we sell the physical stuff that you can see because it's on a screen, that's 40 feet wide or 60 feet wide and 40 feet tall, and it's big, and it's what we're seeing visually and what's happening, but it's what happens inside the characters. That's what gives a movie its real power, and its the satisfaction in an audience member is that we see somebody have experienced something and be moved and changed by it, and along that journey get moved and changed ourselves, hopefully a little bit, and better understanding the world or what it is the writer's trying to say. So a protagonist does not always succeed in the outer journey, though it's a nice and happy ending when they do. And it depends on what you want to write, it depends on what you want to say, and the tone of the kind of movies you feel it's in your style to portray. And then you have to when you design your antagonist is also next week for character creation, but everybody knows this now hopefully everybody knows it in writing for film and animation. This is the character that is designed to physically stop your protagonist's outer journey. The inner journey doesn't need somebody to help stop it, because it's the struggle to achieve the outer journey that's going to make the inner journey happen. So the outer journey is fought against by a character known as the antagonist. So whatever it is the protagonist is trying to achieve, the antagonist, for their own reasons, having nothing to do with the protagonist, doesn't want the protagonist to achieve it because either it gets in the way of something the antagonist is planning, or no, that's pretty much it. The antagonist wants something, and regardless of the protagonist, they're going to get it, and the protagonist, the antagonist, come to a head because either they both want it or whatever the antagonist wants. The protagonist achieving their goal would stop them. Not necessarily just to stop them, but it would stop what they're trying to do. So, for example, if somebody's outer journey is to create a renewable food source for the people they'd never need they wouldn't need anything again, and the antagonist goal is to keep the entire community dependent on him for food and water so that he can rule over them like some kind of lord and king and dictator, then this person taking care of the people and getting them food and water and teaching them to do it for themselves, the antagonist would have a problem with that. It's not that he wants to stop this guy, it's that he wants to keep them reliant on him. And he would do things to make sure that this guy doesn't succeed. It's not personal, it's professional. This is what I'm here to do. I'm here to rule over you. That's what the antagonist would be thinking. I'm here to provide this service. Anyway, you get the idea. And then there are the three supporting characters. And that's what you learn in week 3 of character creation and development. And I'm going over all this for everybody right now simply because it doesn't hurt to have a reminder before they turn it all in writing for film and animation. The 3 major supporting characters are the love interest, the mentor, and the protagonist's reflection character. Now, the love interest is the one character who is inspiring the protagonist's inner journey. This is the only character designed to serve the inner journey other than the protagonist, because you need somebody who they call it the love interest, not because it's necessarily having to be romantic, but people really only change their ways for love. So it can be a father, it can be a brother, it can be a sister, it can be a lover, it can be a husband or a wife. It can be a hometown. It can be, you want to incorporate that into a living bodied person who can inspire the protagonist to learn whatever it is they need to learn on an inner journey. And they either reward the protagonist for moving towards the inner journey, or they punish the protagonist for reverting back to their character flaw. The character flaw is where the protagonist starts. The character cure is where the character ends on the inner journey. So they start with a flaw, and then the cure is what they've learned from your premise. So So, and the inner journey is, it has to do with the love interest and how it gets the protagonist to act that way. Then you have the mentor is a type of protagonist reflection character, but it is a specific type. It's like 10. It's like 10% of protagonist reflection characters are. Sorry, I need a fan. It's getting warm in my office. The protagonist, the mentors are the ones who are teaching your protagonist how to do physically what it is they need to do to achieve their outer journey. So if somebody's going on a mission, this is the person who teaches them how to do the things that they will be doing on the mission in order to survive. Um, and then the other protagonist reflection characters support them in the outer journey also, but they are not teaching, they are along with them on the journey. Now, everybody can have a conversation and give advice. That doesn't make a mentor. A mentor is somebody who teaches physically how to do something. Obi-Wan Kenobi teaches Luke Skywalker how to use a lightsaber, how to channel the Force. None of, but Han Solo is just along. He is just a protagonist reflection character who is helping him achieve his outer journey, but he's not necessarily teaching Luke anything. He's just somebody who can argue with him about the right ways to go about it and give you some conflicted scenes where the mentor isn't there, because you want conflict even in scenes the antagonists aren't in. You have to have conflict in every single scene. So even if you have 3 guys in the room or 10 guys in the room, or girls, when I say guys, I mean everybody, you have 10 characters in a room, uh, you need at least 2 different sets of ways in which these characters feel like they should be going about the next move, because that's what creates conflict. You need conflict in every scene, whether or not there's an antagonist or an antagonist's employee along on the journey. So those are the major characters, and those are what they're turning in. Log lines are far enough in the future; we don't need to worry about that yet. Now that I've discussed all that, it just gives you a heads up in character class. For those of you in writing for film and animation, it reminds you what it is we're trying to accomplish. Before we end, I'm just going to give you one last opportunity to ask questions. Does anybody have any questions before we wrap up? I will take that as a no. I'll look in the chat window. I realize that, nope, no, no, no. I noticed a trend in Hollywood. Okay, here's a question. I noticed a trend in Hollywood of a sort of dual protagonist and antagonist. What do you think about that? Okay, what do you mean by dual protagonist and antagonist? Ms. Henrik, can you use your microphone? Someone someone playing both roles. Name one movie so I can get my head around what you're talking about. Kylo Ren. Okay. Uh, um, okay. I haven't seen the new one yet, so I can't. I know. I'm so bad. But the idea is the protagonist is the one who changes. The antagonist is the one who's fighting them. Um, is there another movie that has that technique used in it? Sorry, I can't use the mic because of my son. Okay. Is there another movie that you can think of that has a character that does that? Otherwise, that's one specific example, and it's not a trend. A trend would be multiple films are doing it. No, I don't watch that show. Now I feel bad. But TV shows work very differently. Look, a protagonist, a lot of times what happens is a mentor, we have false mentors and characters who are teaching the protagonist something, and then they think they're good, and then they turn bad. Or we have characters that start off, you think, are not aligned with our protagonist and are giving them a hard time, and then in the end, you realize that they were a mentor. Like in Legally Blonde, you have the 2 teachers, one of whom you think is supportive, and one of whom you think is just harping on her endlessly. But you realize the one who's giving her a hard time is trying to teach her to do that, uh, teach her to stand strong because she's going to be criticized because she's beautiful and she's blonde, and in that world, the people are going to disrespect her. So she's been harder and she's supportive. And then the guy she thought was supporting her, gave her an internship, is actually doing it to get into her pants, and you realize he's a bad guy. He is not good. He's a false mentor. So characters can change side via perspective. Um, I would assume that the woman in the Star Wars is the protagonist, that she goes through a lot, but maybe I don't know. And then I would think that Luke in the new movie, but don't tell me anything. I have to watch it this week. I have to go see it. Um, but I would assume Luke is the mentor. But you can have more than one mentor, and I talk about that in the week of mentor class. Um, which is there you can have a mentor of mind and a mentor of mission, uh, and they don't necessarily have to agree. And then one of them is often winds up either the false mentor, or it's about a protagonist realizing which way they need to think about their life. For example, in Good Will Hunting, Will has two mentors. He has one doctor working with him on math, and another working with him on through psychology, trying to sort out his trouble in his youth. And one of them is trying to teach him how to what to do with his life, and the other one's trying to teach him how to do it and how you have to make your decisions. And of course, in the end, Will makes a decision that neither of the mentors are bad. They're both wonderful, but he has to choose which route is going to serve his soul and what he needs the most as a person. And it's beautifully executed in that film. So, but mostly for our first project, I would recommend just trying to design one strong mentor, one strong protagonist, one strong antagonist. And a protagonist and an antagonist cannot be the same thing. You have a reading of that that explains that in detail of all the different situations in week two. That says through the antagonist lesson. If you look at it, there's an article that says, "Can the protagonist be the antagonist?" And it explains why. There are four different ways people would consider it possible, and I explain why that's not the way it is, and this is how that works out logistically. And there are also reflection characters who sometimes change and go through arcs as a result of the protagonist going through a change and going through an arc. So what I would believe would happen just from looking at it from a distance would be in the Last Jedi, uh, the girl goes through a change because obviously she starts working with Luke and then something happens, and then she makes a decision and starts going through a change, and then she involves herself with Kylo Ren, and then the Kylo Ren may change also, but usually you can tell who the protagonist is because the person who changes and triggers somebody else to change, the one who gets other people to change with their change, that is the protagonist. Any character can go through change, but the protagonist is the chief one. Um, is that how it worked in that film? Another example of the character Loki in Captain America. Now, these I've seen in Civil War and Tony Stark in Civil War. I guess you see a lot of characters who would otherwise be good or bad, somewhat switching roles. Yeah, people define good and bad by action, not by mission, and sometimes that's a problem. Um, it's a little hard to discuss through the chat. I get that. Yeah, the key is who switches sides, and it sometimes it's hard to sort out who. There are films with multiple protagonists. People don't realize that they're ensemble films, um, and I don't recommend you trying to do that from the get go because what you need then is all these characters all serving the same premise, and their arcs are reaching you to one conclusion. Um, and it's very hard to manage. I'm doing one right now for somebody with six characters with character arcs. That's my current writing job. I'm writing a feature film for a producer, and it is incredibly difficult. So right now, let's try to stick to the basics. You shouldn't have come up with a story idea yet. Not at all. We are simply taking an idea we're taking a premise, and then we're going to design a character to prove that premise with their character arc, and then we're going to design the characters around that character to serve their purposes, so you can write an example of how these things work in a dramatic story. Yes, it may grow beyond the simple fact of what that is at first, but right now, you want to build things from scratch, and you don't want to be overly designing from the outside in when you have never built something from the inside out yet. So what we do in our class is we're building from the inside out. Master mechanics, you need to know where to start, what's at the center, what is everything drilled to, what is holding everything in place, that as you add it on and put it in, so that everything holds together perfectly well. If you start just throwing things on and story ideas and character things like this on the outside, what you're going to have is Frankenstein's monster. And though it's interesting to watch, that was actually about a single thing, as opposed to uh, um, which is about one must let nature take its course, and that trying to undo it will bring nothing but misery. Producer Linda Obst says you have to learn to ride the horse in the direction it's going when you're working in films, because there are powers. Everybody's coming at things, and you have to navigate. You have to look at where you're going, and so create a simple center and build upon it. And then you can get more complicated the further you go down the line. But at the very beginning, stick to the basics. Don't over plan ahead. Nobody in CCD should have a story idea that they're trying to make happen through these ideas. That's why I specifically say in the instructions, we're starting from scratch. We're just going from what it is you want to say, and then we're going to build characters on top of that, and then build characters on top of that character to help fight and support those things that the character is doing to prove your premise. And it's important to do that a couple times before you start trying to work from the outside back in. Work from the inside out. Let the story come from your soul first, so you know how to create something of meaning, so that later down the road, once you're in the practice of figuring out how to do that, you can eventually get to a place where somebody brings you an outside story, and you already know from your process how to dig in and apply it to that greater thing. But if you haven't built from the inside out first, you don't really know how to hardwire everything together yet. So trust me. Please trust me. This is the best way to learn how to do it the first time.
Very cool.
You bet. Does anybody else have any other questions? I noticed on Full Sail Connect next week is the online spring break. Does that mean due dates for week 2 will be pushed back a week? Yes, if we have spring break next week, everything will be pushed back 1 week, and I will be sure to apply that. That's a good question. I just got back from LA, so I had a trip to LA trying to secure more writing work, because that's what we do if we want to be writers. Hold on. Is spring break next week? Why, yes, it is. So this week you're going to come up with all these assignments and stuff, and you're going to do them, and then you'll have a week off, and then we'll start with week 2, the week after that, on. So the week of April 2nd, you guys have off, and then we'll come back on April 9th and do assignments then. I'll go adjust the classes so that the due dates are fixed. Thank you for bringing that up. Does anybody else have any other questions? You're very welcome.
Thank you. No questions. That was great.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for coming. I will do this once a week, every week, just to give everybody a chance to talk about it. And provided the recording works, I will post it on YouTube for everybody to review and learn from.
Excellent.
Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Bye-bye.
You too.